My name is Alice. I am 22 years old and I am writing to you because I really need your advice. I have an older sister, Emily, who is 25 and was supposed to marry Jonathan, who is also 25. Everything seemed perfect between them. They had been together for several years and we all thought they were a perfect match. But recently things have taken a very strange and unexpected turn. And now their wedding is in jeopardy. The reason Jonathan refuses to marry my sister is because she won't agree to it. On top of that, Emily thinks that Jonathan is in love with me. I know this sounds crazy, but let me explain. My sister and I don't have a close relationship with our parents. Nothing dramatic happened to cause the rift, but I kind of drifted away from them after I went to college. In fact, I rarely go home since I moved away for school. Most spring breaks I don't go home but instead go on a trip or visit my grandparents. I think it's better than facing the awkwardness at home. The problem is that my parents and sister are completely different from me. We never get along. They have their own little world, and I don't belong there. I always feel that they never understand me. They never even tried to connect with me as we were growing up. They were always connected by something that didn't interest me. Whenever I brought up a topic that interested me, it was like speaking a foreign language. They just listened, nodded, and then the conversation went back to what interested them. So after a while I stopped trying. But what really bothered me was that when I started to distance myself from them, they didn't even try to connect with me. They seemed to accept my distancing myself from them completely. They seemed happy that I was leaving their lives. To be honest, it made me feel really bad. You would think that when your loved ones slowly distance themselves, the family would notice, but they don't seem to care. This only confirms what I've always felt. I don't belong to them. I only visit them on major holidays, birthdays, and other celebrations. But even then I feel like a guest in their lives. I show up, do the family activities, and then leave. The conversations are always polite but superficial. Emily and I have never had an intimate connection. She has always been the golden child of the family, following the path her parents wanted for her, doing everything right and fitting in perfectly with their world. I was always the outsider, the black sheep. They weren't bad people, but they would undermine me in subtle ways, almost like bullying. You know those small comments that seem harmless on the surface but really sting? Yes, I heard them a lot. Over time, I decided it was better to spend as little time as possible with them. Why put yourself in a situation where you're not welcome and feel like an outsider? Here's the thing. Jonathan ate Christmas dinner with us last year. To be honest, it was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel completely ignored. My family has a way of making me feel like I don't belong. These comments may seem insignificant at first, but over time they have a negative effect. I decided it was better to spend as little time with them as possible. I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I felt unwelcome and out of place. Jonathan ate Christmas dinner with us last year. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel completely ignored. My family has a way of making me feel like I don't belong. I feel like an outsider in my own home. But Jonathan didn't treat me like that. He was really nice to me, treated me like a normal person, not like the weird black sheep I always feel around my family. First, I didn't think much of it. It was just basic politeness, right? But for some reason it really bothered Emily. Jonathan and I didn't have any deep, intimate conversations. We just chatted about random things like trips, school, and interesting things that happened at work. We talked about random trivia like trips, school, and interesting things that happened at work, all the usual stuff. But Emily found it strange. She kept giving me icy stares throughout dinner, but I tried to ignore it. Until later that night, when she snapped at me directly. I'll never forget it. She pulled me aside and said, "I know what you're doing. You've always been jealous of me, and now you want to steal my man." To be honest, I was stunned. I mean, steal her man? What was going on? I laughed and told her she was ridiculous, but she wouldn't let it go. She kept saying that Jonathan was different when I was around, that I was too friendly with him. I didn't even know how to respond. It was such a ridiculous accusation. Where was this coming from? Emily had always liked being the center of attention. She was the perfect one, the one and only. My parents liked her, I understood that. She was the apple of their eye. But accusing me of trying to steal her fiancé? That was unprecedented, even for her. But I tried to ignore it, as I usually did with her dramatic behavior. We weren't really close anyway, so I assumed she was just being paranoid or insecure for some reason. But the thing is, after that night, things became really strange between us. Emily became even more distant. Although I felt that we weren't close anyway, she now started actively avoiding me. If I tried to talk to her, she would only give me one-word answers or act like she didn't want to talk to me. At family gatherings, she always stuck close to Jonathan, as if she was marking her territory. It was ridiculous. And Jonathan acted as if nothing had happened. He was still polite, friendly, and normal towards me. I guess what really bothers me is that my family seems to have taken Emily's side pretty quickly. What bothers me is that my family seems to have taken Emily's side pretty quickly. No one has said anything directly to me, but there are little signs. My mom gives Emily strange looks whenever Jonathan is around. My dad is usually more neutral, but he's started to make comments like it's important for family members to support each other, or that relationships need to be respected. It's all very passive-aggressive. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I never get involved in other people's family disputes, let alone interfere in my sister's love life. Apart from family gatherings, I hardly ever spoke to Emily, so why was I suddenly interested in her fiancé? It made no sense. A few months later, I learned from my grandparents that Emily was engaged. My own sister didn't even bother to tell me. I mean, I didn't expect her to send me a personalized invitation with a heart-shaped design. When I heard the news from my grandparents, I was shocked. It felt like a slap in the face, you know? It confirmed my suspicions that my family didn't care about me. I guess I still held out hope that even though we were on bad terms and living far away from each other, she would still consider me part of this big event in her life. I thought, hey, we're sisters, right? Even if we're not close, I'm still family. But apparently that was too much to ask. I didn't say anything to Emily when I found out about the engagement. At first, I thought she might just be busy with wedding planning or had forgotten to tell me. I know it sounds naive, but for some reason I chose to believe her. I thought maybe she would eventually call me, or at least get an email invitation at the last minute. But days turned into weeks and nothing. Not a peep. Then suddenly Emily called me. I was surprised to see her name appear on my phone, especially since we hadn't spoken much since that awkward conversation at Christmas. I answered the phone and tried to sound as nonchalant as possible. After a few minutes of small talk, she told me that she wasn't inviting me to the wedding. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to digest her words. I didn't want to go. I asked her why, and she gave me the most ridiculous reason: because Jonathan liked you. She said she didn't want me to go because it would be awkward. I couldn't help but laugh. I couldn't believe this was happening. For one thing, Jonathan had no feelings for me. And even if he did, I wouldn't suddenly stand up at the wedding and confess my love for him. I was so shocked that I didn't even want to argue with her. I just said, I hope your wedding goes well and you have a happy marriage. Then I hung up. I don't need this kind of drama in my life. We weren't close, so whether I went to her wedding or not didn't really matter to me. I accepted the fact that Emily and I lived in two completely different worlds a long time ago. I just needed to get this off my chest and maybe get some outside perspective. Am I crazy? Or does this whole situation seem crazy? Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Any advice would be appreciated. Update 1. Yesterday was crazy and I need to get this out while it's still fresh in my mind. What was supposed to be Emily's rehearsal dinner turned into utter chaos, and I got caught up in it somehow. I had a perfectly normal Thursday night. I was working on a task on my laptop when my phone started ringing nonstop. I ignored it at first, but then I realized I had 7 missed calls from my dad. He usually only calls once, so when I finally picked up, I knew something was wrong. His voice was shaking. I had never heard him speak like that before. Alice, you have to come to the venue now. When I asked him what was wrong, he kept repeating that sentence like a broken record. He just said it was about Jonathan and Emily. Please come quickly. The desperation in his voice actually scared me a little. But the thing was, after all that had happened, all the drama and accusations and being banned from the wedding, they really expected me to drop everything and come to their rescue. I told him I wasn't going to the wedding. I reminded him that Emily had made it clear that she didn't want me there. His response was, Alice, please. Jonathan refuses to get married unless you're there. Those words stopped me in my tracks. Before I could react, my phone rang again with another call. It was my mother. I picked it up and she was crying. All she kept saying was, your sister needs you. She seemed to have forgotten how they had treated me over the past few months. Listening to her, it felt like a dream. She kept talking about family loyalty and sisterly love, but they had gotten along just fine until things went wrong. Then Emily called. She was angry and incoherent. Apparently, Jonathan had shown up at the rehearsal dinner and immediately inquired about my whereabouts. When Emily told him I wasn't invited, he was upset but not angry. He stood up in front of everyone, their friends, the wedding party, both families, and said, "I can't marry someone who treats their sister this way. And you're cruel." Emily was crying on the phone. "I've been watching how we treat you," he said. "And I can't join a family that treats people this way." He said he felt the same way about me as Mom and Dad did, and he didn't want that kind of harmful behavior in his life. And honestly, a big part of me felt vindicated. Finally, someone saw what I had been dealing with for years. Someone finally stood up and said it wasn't okay. But Emily wasn't finished. She started to formulate this carefully planned plan while she sobbed. She said I could go to the wedding and tell everyone it was all a big misunderstanding. She said I could say I chose not to attend. She said it was all my idea. She kept saying, "You just have to tell Jonathan you don't want to go to the wedding. Alice, I have never rejected you. I can't lose him." After months of me playing the villainous ex-girlfriend who stole the man, she had the nerve to ask me to lie to save their relationship. I was silent for a long time, letting her cry on the other end of the line. Then I told her that I had never rejected her, and that I had never given her a reason to distrust me. As calmly as I could, I said, "Emily, I will not lie for you. You chose to reject me and to treat me like I was insignificant. Now, you have to live with the consequences of those choices. This is not a problem I can solve. But he will listen to you." She almost screamed. "He trusts you." "Maybe he trusts me because I've never given him a reason not to," I replied. "Maybe he's picked up on something in the way you've been treating me and it's made him question it. Doesn't matter who you really are. In any case, I'm not going to the meeting. I'm not going to lie to make you look better." I hung up before she could protest any further. Then I switched off my phone completely, made myself a cup of tea and sat down to think about what had just happened. Over the next few hours, my phone kept lighting up with notifications. There were text messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, voice messages from my parents, and missed calls from Emily's friends. I felt like the whole family was pressuring me to clean up the mess Emily left behind. But for the first time in my life, I was completely sure that staying away from them was the right thing to do. Jonathan had seen through their actions all on his own. He had made his decision based on the way they treated me, not because of anything I had said or done. Honestly, it felt like the most radical proof I could have asked for. I turned my phone off last night while I slept. It's still off, and I slept better than I have in months. For once, let them deal with the consequences of their actions. I'm tired of being the family scapegoat and cleaning up after everyone else's messes. This morning I learned through my grandparents, the only family members I'm still in touch with, that Jonathan won't take any calls from Emily or my parents. Apparently, he has told the family that the wedding is off for good. Emily is devastated, and so are my parents. I'm trying to contain the damage, but I've ultimately decided to stay out of it and calm myself down. I know this letter is long, but I need to get everything off my chest. Thank you to everyone who commented on my last post and supported my decision to distance myself from my family. You were right. Sometimes the best thing to do is to step back and let people face the consequences of their actions. Many of you asked about my childhood and why I have distanced myself from my family for so long. So I didn't mention it in my initial post because it's a heavy subject. But I think it's time to clear up some of the mystery, especially in light of recent events. Here's the thing, I have social anxiety. Growing up, I always felt like there was something wrong with me, but I couldn't find the right words to explain it. My parents were old-school people who thought mental health issues were just excuses. They would often say that I was making a big deal out of nothing or that I needed to toughen up. If I had an obvious anxiety or panic attack, they would say I was weak or lazy. In retrospect, there were a lot of red flags. I can recognize them now. When I was 15, I gave a long speech in English class. I have social anxiety, so the idea of standing in front of 30 students was a nightmare. The night before, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I was very nervous and physically unwell. I told my parents and asked to stay at home. My dad replied, "Life doesn't stop just because you're nervous. Don't take everything so seriously." As a result, I completely collapsed in front of the whole class. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't hold my notes. My voice kept trembling, and some of the children started giggling. I felt the room spinning, but I couldn't escape. When I finally got home, instead of comforting me, my mother said, "See, I don't feel well." I told my parents that I wanted to stay home. My father said, "Life doesn't stop just because you're nervous. Don't take everything so seriously." Finally, I completely broke down in front of the whole class. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my notes. My voice kept trembling and some of the kids started giggling. I felt the room spinning, but I couldn't escape. When I finally got home, my mom didn't comfort me, she just said, "See, Emily was the perfect assistant, but she made everything worse. She was captain of the debate team, president of the student council, basically everything I was too anxious to be. She often invited a large group of friends over to hang out, and they always said that I was a weird older sister who never left her room." Once I overheard Emily tell her friends, "Yes, she's just not social. She thinks she's too good for everyone." My freshman year of college was a complete breakdown. The stress of being far from home, dealing with a new social situation, trying to keep up with classes, and managing anxiety all became too much. I remember sitting in my dorm room, unable to breathe, feeling like I was going to die. My roommate realized how bad I was doing and dragged me to the campus counseling center. There I met Dr. Martinez, who was the first person to really listen to me. She didn't dismiss my feelings or tell me to toughen up. Instead, she helped me understand what was happening to me. After a few sessions, she referred me to an IA psychiatrist for a proper diagnosis. After receiving the diagnosis, it was as if I had finally found the name of the monster I had been fighting my whole life. It wasn't just an exaggeration or a cry for attention, as my family had always claimed. It was a real illness, and more importantly, one that could be treated. The treatment process was eye-opening. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my family had not only failed to support me, but had actually caused me harm. She taught me how to set boundaries, assert my rights, and recognize harmful patterns. From then on, I began to distance myself from my family intentionally. But what really broke me was when I tried to explain my diagnosis to my parents, and they completely dismissed it. My mom even said, "These doctors just want to make money by labeling everything as a disease." Emily rolled her eyes and said, "I use big words to excuse being an aunt." Last Thanksgiving, before the wedding farce began, I made one last attempt to get them to understand. I prepared a speech about social anxiety, complete with statistics and research. My father interrupted me and said, "Alice, when are you going to stop making excuses and start facing reality?" That's when I realized that they would never change. They would never try to understand me, and saw me as a difficult child. A child who caused trouble, an incorrigible problem. I suddenly felt very free when I realized this. It made me stop seeking their approval or understanding. In retrospect, I can see how this pattern directly affected the wedding. Emily immediately assumed that I had stolen her fiancé from her. My parents quickly accepted her version of events without question. In their eyes, I was a troublemaker who needed to be controlled and disciplined. Jonathan saw through it all. He noticed how they treated me, ignoring my feelings. I felt like they were using me as a scapegoat for everything. Unlike the rest of my social circle, who just accepted what they saw as reality, Jonathan was blunt. It was harmful behavior. I would like to say that this wedding farce didn't happen in isolation. It was the culmination of years of playing the villain, the problem child, the child in need of correction in my family. Which is probably why Jonathan's decision was such a relief to me. Finally, someone understood what I'd been dealing with all these years. And that's the background to the story. Many of you have been wondering. It helps to explain why I wasn't in a hurry to fix things. I'd spent so much time trying to change the way my family saw me. I'd been trying to make them understand me. I'd been trying to earn their approval. I was tired of it. Sometimes it's just healthier to accept that some people will never understand or accept you, even if those people are your family. Update 3. It's been a month since the events took place, and I need to share the final chapter of this story. The farce at the wedding has escalated beyond my imagination, but at least it can now be said to be truly over. After Emily's wedding was called off, she completely broke down. Somehow she got hold of my new phone number and leaked it to everyone she knew. Suddenly I was receiving hundreds of text messages with messages like, "You ruined my life," "You're a liar," and "You're a bitch." I started getting malicious messages from her friends, distant relatives, and even strangers. The threats ranged from guilt trips to outright intimidation. Then there was the vandalism. First, someone egged my car. Typical Emily. She used to do that to annoying girls in high school. When that didn't have the desired effect, she escalated. I can't remember how many times my car was damaged, my mailbox destroyed, or my apartment door plastered with vicious notes. The final straw was when she slashed all 4 of my tires and left a threatening note in Emily's unmistakable handwriting. Throughout all of this, my parents have chosen to ignore her actions. Their response to each incident has been the same. Girls will be girls. Or, you should try to understand your sister's pain. Even when I showed them the security footage of Emily trying to break into our apartment, they still thought she just wanted to talk. Thankfully, I had the support of the Reddit community, especially those who advised me to record everything and install security cameras. I was prepared for this, and your recommended lawyer helped me understand that this was not a simple family dispute. It was criminal harassment and vandalism. We gathered video evidence, photos, witness statements, and hundreds of threatening messages to build an unassailable case. When my lawyer sent Emily the cease and desist letter along with our evidence, she finally realized that she had gone too far. The security footage of her attempted break-in was particularly damaging. She tried to negotiate through her own lawyer, offering to pay damages. If I give up everything, I refuse to back down. This is not about money. It's about responsibility and consequences. The court hearing was swift and decisive. Emily was found guilty of criminal harassment, vandalism, and attempted break-in. She was given a 1-year suspended sentence, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order. The judge's sentence was particularly harsh, considering the premeditated nature of her actions and the evidence of escalation. My parents' reaction to the verdict was predictable. They accused me of being heartless and ruining your sister's life. When I reminded them that Emily had harassed me, destroyed my property, and tried to break into my home, they suggested that I should move out if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time I ever intended to talk to them. The civil proceedings were settled out of court. Emily had to pay for all the damage she had caused, plus additional compensation for moral damages and loss of earnings. I lost several freelance clients because of her harassment on social media. What's more, the settlement came with a non-binding clause that applied to our parents. They could no longer act as intermediaries or messengers. My lawyer believes that part of the reason for the quick settlement was that Emily and my parents were worried about their reputation. As it turned out, they cared more about what their friends at the country club thought than about actually doing the right thing. Typical. I have since moved to a secure building with 24/7 surveillance. My contact details have been completely changed. My social media is. I have locked my apartment, and my work clients have been very understanding of the situation. In fact, I've even received an offer for a better job from someone who was impressed by the way I handled the situation after hearing my story. The most surprising result of all this is that for the first time in my life, I feel free. I no longer carry the expectations and judgments of my family. I am no longer the scapegoat. I am no longer the difficult child or the rambunctious child. I am just Alice building my life. I want to thank the Reddit community for supporting me. Your advice on documentation and safety measures played a huge role in court. Your supportive comments helped me stay strong when I doubted myself, and your stories of similar experiences made me realize I wasn't alone. To anyone dealing with a toxic family member, remember that having the same DNA doesn't mean anyone has the right to abuse you. Sometimes the healthiest thing to do is to leave. Let them face the consequences of their actions. This is not about revenge, but about setting boundaries and demanding respect. My social anxiety is still there, but it is getting better with therapy. It turns out that this is largely related to the constant misinformation and criticism I received as a child. Who would have thought that staying away from toxic people could be so effective? Now that this chapter of my life is really over, I won't be updating anymore. I have focused on my studies, my career, and building a new support system with my chosen family. I want to thank everyone who has followed my story and offered support. You have helped me find the strength to speak up for myself and find the courage to leave. Someone once said that the best revenge is to live well. And I would like to add that the best ending is knowing that you finally spoke up for yourself. I will no longer be anyone's victim or scapegoat. My life now belongs to me, and I will never look back. Thank you, Reddit.